Hello class, this week we're going to be talking about the context of globalization. This week we're going to learn about the definition of globalization and the three different types of globalization, which are political, economic, and cultural globalization. But just quickly to get started, I wanted to do an exercise with you all. So what do you think are the top songs of 2020? Where do you think those songs come from? So I have done a little bit of digging and I found this. These are the top songs of 2020, specifically pop songs. So as you can see, the first one is Dance Monkey. The second one is Señorita by Camila Cabello. And then we have things like Girls Like You by Maroon 5, Memories by Maroon 5. We have Circles by Post Malone. All of these songs, right? And let me pose the question, what do these songs have in common? Well, the thing that they have in common is that most of these songs are primarily produced here in the United States or by American artists. So it's really important that we start looking at things like this really deeply, because when it comes to globalization, it has a lot to do with the power that one culture exerts over other cultures. And as we can see here, just looking at the top songs of 2020, we can see that the United States has a lot of influence over other countries when it comes to pop music, at least. So I wanted to do this as an introduction, just kind of to highlight the importance of globalization and how it can affect you personally in your life. So to get started, the first thing that I wanted to do is cover what globalization is. So in chapter 2, on page 35, we have the definition of globalization, which I will be breaking down for you all right now. So when we talk about globalization, we talk about a complex web of forces, which means that it's not only like one-sided or it comes from one person, it's just multiple things happening at once. So it has to do with web forces and factors that have brought people, cultures, cultural products, and markets, as well as beliefs and practices into increasingly great proximity to an interrelationship with one another within inequitable relationships of power. Now that's a really big definition. So let's break it down. So a lot of globalization has to do is just how different cultures have come together. Now, back in the day, way before the internet, way before travel, way before that, it took, a boat ride or like, a train ride to kind of connect different cultures to one another. And a lot of it had to do with trading. Nowadays, we have the power of internet, we have the power of like airplanes and all of that. And that kind of connects and brings cultures together, right? It brings us to closer proximity. Even though you might be talking to somebody who lives in Japan, because you have the power of the internet and all of these applications such as TikTok, FaceTime, Skype, and even Zoom, you have all of these technologies that allow to bring different people from different cultures together. So because of the closer proximity, because of all of these factors that we have going around, it has brought different cultures and different people together, but unfortunately, we have unequal relationships of power. So referring back to what we did in the first slide with the top songs of 2020, we can see that there is an unequal relationship of power. Most of the songs are produced here in the United States. We don't see any artists from other countries. Like we don't see any artists that come from the continent of Africa, kind of like popping up in this chart of music, of most popular music. So keep thinking about that. It's something that we need to reflect on when it comes to globalization. So now that we kind of get an idea of what globalization is, I would like us to talk about economic globalization. Now, economic globalization is probably the one that's more prevalent in our daily lives. And economic globalization is highlighted by, multinational corporations. So if you have ever traveled to another country, let's say to another continent, such as Europe, or if you travel to Latin America, you probably have seen either a McDonald's or a Starbucks there. And the reason why that is there is because there are multinational corporations that kind of export their products everywhere. It is very rare to find a multinational corporation from another country that kind of is everywhere around the world, as opposed to Starbucks and McDonald's. And economic globalization has a lot to do with international trade and flows of capital. So who gets to export more or send more stuff out there than receive stuff? That also has to do a lot with power. If you sell more of your stuff rather than importing more of your stuff, that means that you have a greater power because you are selling your stuff and not spending money on buying other people's stuff. Do you think, my question to you all is, do you think this affects the way that we see other places? In the past, I've had a lot of students say that it does affect the way that you see other places because often when we travel other parts of the world, we like to explore different places, but we can always count on finding that McDonald's or finding that Starbucks that kind of like makes us feel like we are somehow connected to home, right? So it does make us see the places in a different way, whether we attach more value to a particular place or other. So that's economic globalization. So just think about it as who gets to sell more of the stuff, who gets to buy more stuff from other countries, and just as multinational corporations. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is political globalization. So globalization not only affects economic situations, but it also affects political situations. And the clearest example that we can see about globalization is in the idea that democracy is connected to free trade agreements. We have seen in the past few years, there has been wars in different countries around the world because we want to democratize different countries. And the reason why we want to do so is because we have this idea that democracy equals free trade agreements. One of the things that I want you to keep in mind is that democracy is a system of politics, and free trade agreement is a system of economics. So they're two separate things. So this whole idea that they're connected with one another can be debated on. And one of the things that we have been seeing is that this has led to a movement towards democratization, meaning that we go into other countries, try to get them to change their system of government and move towards a democracy. And the question that I'm going to pose to you all is like, why is it a problem? And I think that Iraq can really answer that for us, right? A lot of that, what happened there, a lot of people, were welcoming of democracy. Other people were not so welcoming of democracy. And even though, when the United States tried to intervene and help, it might not have been something that they have wanted, right? Maybe their form of government is something that they have wanted. We don't know that. And this has led to ideological wars. For example, like, whose ideology is best? Is Islam better? Is Christianity better? Is democracy better? Is an authoritarian government better? It has led to a lot of wars amongst different types of people, which kind of intensifies, political conflicts that we've had in the past. The last thing that I wanted to talk to you about is cultural globalization. And this is the last type of globalization. And this one kind of like talks about more of the cultural flows that happens. So as the definition says here, it has to do with migration and formation of cultural connectives. So the idea of migrating, moving around places in the world, traveling and all of that has created connections among different cultures, right? And there is a flow of cultural ideas, objects, food, whatever you name it, amongst different parts of the world, amongst different cultures. And this has led to unequal power relations. And then we see hybrid cultures. So one of the things that I want to mention is that because of people moving around the world, because of migration and all of that, we see a lot of different types of like food around the world. We see a lot of different types of music, of cultural things. Like an example of like cultural globalization would be anime, right? That was something that emerged originally in Japan, and now we see, comic cons or like anime cons here in the United States as well. So that would be an example of a cultural globalization. But if you think about it, it has to do a lot with unequal power relationships because anime is popular, but it's often seen as a subculture, not something that's predominant for the majority in the United States. So that can show you the unequal power between a culture that we brought from somewhere else. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight with cultural globalization is that it leads to cultural imperialism, meaning that one culture tends to send all, the cultural flow around the world. So the United States, again, would be a perfect example of a cultural imperialist country. If you ask anybody around the world if they have seen a show like The Simpsons, American Dad, or Family Guy, most likely you're going to get people saying that they can identify the shows or that they have at least heard them, if not watched them. So that could be an example of how the United States has cultural imperialism over other countries. Now, I know that this lecture is very short and not exactly what discussion we will be having in class, but I kind of just wanted to post some examples so that you can understand better how cultural, political, and economic globalization plays a part in intercultural communication. Now, what I want you to think about is how do these three things affect the way that we interact, communicate, and think about other cultures? How does this all connect to inequality, ethnocentrism, positionality, and standpoint. How does this all connect together? I want you to start making connections between what we're learning in class and things that we discuss and we see around the world. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to email me, and I hope that this has provided a better understanding as to what globalization is.